Alright, so I'm actually going to be quick about this one, relatively speaking, compared to some of my more recent videos, because, frankly, I don't think there's much to say about the third season of The Dragon Prince, except that, again, I'm not seeing a ton of people talk about this show, and again, if you're not watching it, you should be. If you're someone who likes the kind of stuff that I talk about on this channel, you absolutely should be watching this show. More so even than past seasons, the tone of this show feels very Avatar: The Last Airbender-ish. And while this season definitely goes in directions that I didn't expect it to, at least not yet, it's really good, and it really surprised me with where it took the story. This video is going to have minor spoilers in it. I'm not going to spoil any specifics, I promise, but I am going to talk about a couple of things that do happen this season. I'm going to try to be vague about them, but if you don't want any spoilers at all, this is where you should probably duck out of this video. It's good. This season's good. The whole show is good, and I think it keeps getting better. Like, the first season had some, I think, serious weaknesses to it. Like, not, like, actual deficiencies, but weaknesses. And the second season was a lot better, and this season was, I think, again, better than that, though I can see people disagreeing on whether or not Season 2 or Season 3 is the better season. So if you are the kind of person who likes the kind of stuff that I talk about on this channel again, or if you just like good fantasy that's pretty frickin' funny and has great character designs and great characterization and really cool character dynamics and relationships, go watch this show. Like, I don't think it's in danger of being canceled or anything, and it's definitely not finished yet. It looks like it's going to have 6 seasons, or at least it looks like it's planned to have 6 seasons. And I don't think it's in danger of being canceled or anything, don't get me wrong. But I don't see people talking about this show very much. And they should be. Because more people should be watching this. That said, moving into the territory of minor spoilers. Those who don't know for some reason and are still watching this video, the main conflict of this series is that the magical continent, I guess country maybe would be a better term for it, of Xadia is in conflict with the 5 human kingdoms that occupy the western side of the complete continent that these two, let's say nations, these 2 nations exist on. Ever since the king of one of those human kingdoms, in retaliation for the death of his wife, killed the Dragon King, tensions have risen between the dragons and the elves of Xadia and the various races of humanity from those 5 kingdoms, but the conflict goes further back than that, because originally only the magical beings of Xadia had magic, until humans discovered how to use dark magic, where they drain magic from magical life forms and use it to fuel spells. Like, they can do other kinds of magic, but they have to have magical items which represent the various elements, the various elemental powers of this world. In order to do that, dark magic is a little more free and broad, and they can do more stuff with it. In fact, it was the use of dark magic and the refusal to stop using dark magic which led to humanity being banished from Xadia to what is now their home in the first place. And right off the bat, this season recontextualizes an old conflict that we saw just a little bit of at the very beginning of the show, adding more context and more nuance to it, and making the Dragon King at the time, I think his name was Sol Reagan, I think is how they pronounced it, making him out to be far more the antagonist in that situation, rather than the human who was involved in that very brief conflict, which is different context than I expected that event to have, should it ever be expanded upon. So that's already super interesting. And as the end of the last season implied, this season does begin with Callum, Rayla, and the baby dragon Zim making their way into Xadia in an attempt to cross Xadia and return Zim to his mother, the Dragon Queen, in the hopes that the knowledge that her child was not killed by humans back when her husband was killed will open her mind to peace. And meanwhile, Callum's younger brother Ezran, the true heir to the throne, has finally learned that his father, the king, is dead, And so he returns back home to Catullus, which is the name of his kingdom. I think I get the names of the human kingdoms mixed up a lot. To take the throne, since up until now, the person running things has been Viren, I won't say the overall villain of the show, but one of the overall villains of the show. And he's been very, very vocal about wanting to invade Zadia and either take over or just kill everybody. It's kind of unclear, and it doesn't really seem like he actually has much of a plan. And while I do believe that up until this point, he has had the best interest of humanity in mind, with a side helping of wanting to further his own power base, by the time this season is over, it doesn't seem like the former is still something that he has any say in. So all future actions that he takes will be to further his own power base. So, depending on where he goes from here, he may or may not lose all sympathy that he already had as a villain, which wasn't a lot to begin with. And yes, a criminal elf, whose name I don't remember, he's like a legendary mage in this world though, has literally been whispering in Viren's ear this entire time via a magic bug, as he can't speak to Viren directly. He's imprisoned somewhere in Zadia, I would imagine. But Viren has had multiple chances now to change his ways, multiple opportunities. There have been multiple people who have been there and willing to help him become a better, more accepting person, and he has refused every opportunity. He's just a straight up bad guy at this point. I don't see him being redeemed, and I don't particularly want him to be either. I've heard some people say that this season is rushed, and I understand why they would say that. I felt like it was paced fine, but things did happen pretty quickly here. Already, by the end of this season, Zadia and the human kingdoms came under direct conflict, and there was a big battle, one side of it being led by Viren, and the other side of it being led by our heroes, and supplemented by a bunch of Sunfire elves, as well as Callum and Ezran's Aunt Amaya, who is the best character in the show, don't at me. And just like last season, Callum furthers his abilities as a human mage who has magic within him. And not because he was born with it like the elves were, but because he was dedicated enough to form a bond with a magical element, all on his own. And now he can draw upon that. He has a bond with the sky specifically. And I think he's going to go further than that. I think he's going to form bonds with some of the other primal sources of magic and broaden his skills even further by the time this series is over. And this is one of those mild spoilers. By the end of this season, the conflict that has been built up to this point is effectively over. And there is a tentative peace, at least broadly, between Zadia and the human kingdoms. Like, there's still going to be, like, individual bigoted people, but the nations themselves are at peace by the end of this, and it looks like from this point forward, it's going to be an entirely different conflict with Viren and that aforementioned imprisoned elf whose name I still can't remember. I should look it up, but I'm not going to. Being the primary antagonistic force, because the elf, I actually paused the recording to look it up, his name is Erebos. Erebos seems to have some villain plan that he's using Viren to accomplish, and Viren thinks that Erebos is like his staunch ally, and Viren's definitely going to get betrayed down the line, or maybe we'll get to see a twist and Viren will actually betray Erebos and become the greater threat of the series. That would almost be more satisfying, honestly. But one way or another, the two of them are going to be the major antagonistic force going forward, and also probably Viren's daughter Claudia. Even though I really like her as a character, it definitely seems like she's going more down the villain route than the hero route. It's annoying. I will also say very, very briefly that if you are a Raylan shipper, you're going to like this season a lot. If you're not, I'm very sorry for your loss. And again, the particular element that I'm hinting at here shouldn't be that hard to figure out what it is, honestly. It happens a little more quickly than I expected it to, but again, I don't feel like it was rushed. I feel like it was justified based on the character dynamics as they already existed. Those dynamics just had to be pushed a little further. I will say, though, that this show still moves at a fast enough pace, which does not mean that it's rushed. It just means that it's designed to be a fast-paced show. It moves at a fast enough pace, though, that I don't feel like I've learned much about this world. Whereas, roughly this far into Avatar: The Last Airbender, which had largely the same creative staff working on it, I had a substantial understanding of how the world of that show worked, and I'd even grown to like and appreciate a lot of the locations within it. Whereas in this show, because the pace is so much faster, and the characters are in such a rush to travel where they're going, and usually have means to cross great distances quickly, I feel like I barely even know anything about the few locations that we've even spent a substantial amount of time at. Like, the location we've seen the most of, I guess, would be Katalis, and there are locations within the Kingdom of Katalis that I think I know a lot about. I think I'd recognize them if they were, like, done in different style and none of the characters were there or something, you know what I mean? But I don't know anything about how Katalis is laid out as a kingdom. I don't know anything about what the specific customs are, aside from, like, how to rise to be king or something. And while there are certainly memorable locations that the journeying characters visited throughout their journey, I don't really feel like I know much about any of those locations either. And I wish that weren't the case. I wish this world felt a little more fleshed out and alive to me. I think I'd really, really like it. A lot more if it were. Like, I think that's my only legitimate criticism of this show overall and this season, and by association, that doesn't go into the territory of being nitpicky. That said, I still really like this show. I still think there's a lot more good that comes out of it than there is things that are annoying or bad. In particular, and I haven't talked about this yet, I really like the humor in this show. It's very referential, but it's referential in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way that I think really works. Like, one episode of the show made a Sokka's boomerang joke, because Callum is voiced by the same voice actor who voiced Sokka in Avatar, and a here's Wonderwall joke in like 10 minutes of each other. It was fantastic. And that's just the referential stuff. There's other humor in this that isn't referential humor, but that's just the referential stuff, and it's enough to keep me laughing pretty regularly. And then there's humor that's derived from, like, the character dynamics and stuff. That's also pretty freaking good, too. Like, this isn't a perfect show, and if we're talking Netflix series that I particularly like and would talk about on this channel, I think, like, She-Ra, for example, is a better show overall, but this is still a really solid show. Again, if you're into fantasy or you seem to line up with the kind of stuff that I enjoy, this show is probably a show for you, and I'm certainly looking forward to seeing where the series goes going forward. I just wish it would take its time a little bit more, rather than remaining pretty fast-paced all the way through. All of that said, though, guys, what did you think of The Dragon Prince Season 3? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.